As pragmatism developed from the final years of the 19th century into the 20th century, it began to shy away from its strong logical roots into psychology and other areas, much like continental philosophy, though never making a complete transition. Peirce even called his version of it pragmaticism, in order to differentiate it from James's more psychologically centered version. As American philosopher and psychologist John Dewey began his writings, he embraced William James's conception of a philosophical enterprise focused on the practical lives of individuals. He strongly centered his theory on democracy and political theory, developing concepts in psychology, education, ethics, and even aesthetics in order to understand life in community. Learning, for him, was a social process which involved a version of James's radical empiricism, in that we regulate our actions and perspective of the world according to our personal experience, but also in interacting with others in a community. He thus broke with Hobbes's rationalist conception of the egotistical individual socialized by the state to a naturalistic understanding of society and the social development of knowledge. Art, then, would be a reflection of situated cultures of communities, and it is therefore an integral part of it. A democratic government would therefore be the optimal manner for society to flourish, investing in cultural and pedagogical education towards social life and skills. He also offered one of the first conceptions of gender as a social construct, referring to the role of women in society as intrinsically dependent on their social context and not on their biology. Even though he veered more into James's conception of pragmatism, Dewey sympathized with Peirce in his interest in logic, and also wrote greatly on epistemological concerns about the clarity of language, a defining characteristic for the coming analytic movement. Although pragmatism practically became a third tradition during the early 20th century, it is unquestionable that its roots, especially with Peirce and even Dewey to a degree, were crucial to the development of the analytic tradition. Recent developments in propositional logic and the vindication of linguistics as an independent field of study also had great impact on the themes in which analytic philosophy would be invested in the years to come. This is especially true when we consider that the birth of this tradition is often coined the linguistic turn in philosophy, where language, logic, and mathematics would play a pivotal role in dealing with philosophical issues. It began officially as Bertrand Russell and George Edward Moore broke with the predominant British version of Hegelian idealism of the time, urging for greater conceptual clarity in the philosophical discourse. As continental philosophy grew, so did its focus on subjectivity. Philosophical terminology was saturated with neologisms, literary and poetic writing, and countless metaphysical concepts and systems, which is great for dealing with what they purport to do, but it is also a logician's greatest nightmare. The more one writes in abstract or intentionally obscurantist fashion, the harder it is to establish a clear logical connection between concepts, arguments, and conclusions, and thus the harder it is to understand the true meaning behind the text. This is one widespread characteristic of Hegel and his sympathizers, as if reading his works without prior knowledge of his terminology, it resembles a religious or occult text with many capital letter concepts and niche terminology. It can be argued then that this isn't only a break specifically with British idealism, but with most philosophical traditions which did not strive for clarity and objectivity. But in order for the analytic tradition to finally arise, a revolution would need to take place, and that's what Gottlob Frege brought to the table. A mathematician and a logician, Frege inherited Boole's intent of reducing the whole of mathematics into logic, or logicism, as this movement became known. And he thought he did, though he was later disproven. We'll delve further into his specific contributions to logic in a dedicated Fregean logic tutorial, but we can state here he took Boole's algebraic logic and developed an entire intertwined theory of logic and mathematics with a thorough theory of language to unite both. As he identified, our everyday language was unfit for logic as it was fraught with nuance, ambiguity, and an overall lack of objectivity. Thus, as Leibniz originally intended, he set out to develop a universal formal language which encompassed the whole of natural language, or our everyday language naturally developed by humans, and of formal language, the language of logic and mathematics. To this, he used the idea of sense and reference, where, regardless of the language, every linguistic expression, mathematical or otherwise, would have a sense, or how you present a given object or concept, and a reference, which would be the actual object or concept that expression is referring to. For example, Professor Dave and Dave Farina would be two different senses of me, Dave, who is their reference. With this logical, universal language, he was able to propose a strong argument toward an entirely logical conception of the world and how we talk about it, the ultimate goal of the latter empiricists and also the forthcoming new analytics. What changes then from empiricism to analytic philosophy is the shift from the exclusive focus on the empirical method toward a greater preoccupation with how language interacts with this world through logic. Unfortunately, in his last years, he delved into conservatism and right-wing inclinations onto fascism and anti-Semitism, an aspect which the founders of analytic philosophy as a school certainly did not share, as besides their focus on logic and mathematics, they veered into democracy, pro-diversity humanism, and even environmentalism. These figures were George Edward Moore and Bertrand Russell, but before dealing with them, let's take a look at Russell's professor and later co-author, Alfred Whitehead. Whitehead was a mathematician and philosopher who was primarily concerned with how logic and algebra interacted with the geometrical world. He coined what became process metaphysics, which instead of understanding reality as objects in the world made of fixed individual points, saw existence as a series of ongoing processes interacting with each other, a perspective which influenced much environmentalist discussion to this day. In education, like Dewey, he focused on the growth of students beyond technical skills and abstract memorization toward a liberal education focused on intellectual growth and opening their minds to their own development as people. Additionally, he also provided some valid criticism of Einstein's theory of relativity. With one of his former students, Bertrand Russell, he wrote the Principia Mathematica, or Principles of Mathematics, one of the most influential logic and overall philosophy books of the 20th century. It was a sister work with Moore's Principia Ethica, Principles of Ethics, both inspired by Newton's Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, and dealt with the foundations of mathematics from their logicist perspective. Russell was thoroughly inspired by Leibniz and refined Frege's new logic toward the logicist project, as we shall see in the contemporary logic tutorials, writing eloquently on all areas of philosophy except for aesthetics, although he did receive the Nobel Prize in Literature later in life. To understand how knowledge exists and correlates with the world, he embraced Frege's logical emphasis on a philosophy of language, where it would be a task of philosophy to clarify language from its natural everyday aspects to settle atomic facts, or the simplest logical truths of the world. However, he defended that human knowledge tends to be uncertain, and only through thorough scientific analysis, study, and understanding our own and everyone's biases can we achieve less uncertain beliefs. Though a proponent of eugenics and population control in his early life, he was also an avid political writer, being openly anti-war, against nuclear armaments, and a defender of diversity and socialism, and even universal basic income, though critical of the USSR's brutality, and he frequently engaged in open dialogues with notorious politicians toward his causes. The establishment of continental philosophy and analytic philosophy were the main cornerstones for most of the philosophical discourse from the early 20th century until today. In the next few tutorials, we will analyze their flagship groups and others who furthered their ideas afterwards.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.